My name is Cassandra Thomas, and I wanted to welcome you to today's webinar hosted by the Safe+Ready Institute. Today's presenter is Chris Floyd from Disaster Resistant Communities Group, who will be talking about consequence management as part of the active shooter preparedness series. Please note there will be other webinars in this series, and you can find those on safeandready.org. I'm going to welcome Chris and let him start.
Well, good day, everyone. My name is Chris Floyd. As Cassandra mentioned, I am with the Disaster Resistant Communities Group, and we conduct online exercises across the country. Matter of fact, month before last in Washington State, conducted one of the largest multi-location active shooter exercises for the Department of Human and Social Services. Now, we run a lot of exercises. Most of the time it focuses on that initial response, what you do to prevent an event from happening, what you do during the initial response, and it usually plays out for a few hours after the gunman has been taken down. Then most active shooter scenarios and exercises and training seem to kind of die off at that point and really never focus on the longer term recovery, or what I refer to as consequence management. So what we're going to do today, we're going to kind of play through some of the important components of an exercise that we have called Ardent Century, and we're going to hit various high points, and I'm going to give you some additional information that you may want to consider in your planning process. All right. Once again, Chris Floyd should have had this slide at the very beginning. So, what we're going to do in playing through this exercise, I'm going to touch on a number of high points. I'm going to explain some thought processes behind the reason to incorporate parts and pieces of what we're going through today in your active shooter recovery plan or consequence management plan. And at the bottom of the page, you'll see above the green line, you'll see a URL, a website you can go to for additional information on this particular exercise, the full exercise for workplaces. So, with this particular exercise, the scenario involved a shooter coming into the workplace, day one, primary office location. This was an employee of the facility who had been terminated the previous day and returns to the building, walks in, immediately begins firing at employees. Over the few minutes that ensued, we have 9 employees that have lost their life. We have 3 visitors who have lost their life. We have 11 other individuals, both employees, potentially visitors, as well as clients who have lost their life. Law enforcement has arrived on scene in a matter of 20 minutes, give or take. They secured the location. They've taken down the bad guy, basically shot the bad guy. Your office was evacuated. Your office building is now closed. So we're looking at this from the standpoint, day one, it's a late Friday afternoon. It's 2:43 p.m. and at this point you've evacuated your building and you're beginning to think through, okay, what do we need to be doing now that the bad guy's dead, so to speak. So we've accounted for all the staff on site, and as we move forward, one of the first issues we need to start thinking about are media relations, public information. Yes, law enforcement, emergency response agencies are going to be on scene. They're going to have a very prominent role in providing public information. However, at the end of the day, you kind of own the disaster. You own the shooting. It happened at your workplace. So it's going to be important for you to be part of that public information team for the traditional media side in terms of television, radio, print, so that you can interface and provide the kind of information you want the general population to know about what your plan is, reopening, how quickly, what are you doing internally, so that you're ready to move forward in the days and weeks to come. The other part of the whole public information, say you have a location, multiple locations in the region, you want to be able to reach out to all those locations as quickly as possible. Now that comes back to like a phone hotline that you can let all the other staff members of those locations know what's going on, potentially lock down their building, unsure as to if they're under a potential threat. You want to incorporate your social media channels, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, whatever, into your notification process to keep the general public apprised as to what you are doing as the business owner, the location manager, the business manager. Another recommendation is immediately start pushing information onto your website. Make sure you have external access to the website from a laptop, tablet, whatever, so you can push information on your website, make sure individuals know what's happening at your location. Now, there are numerous mass notification systems that are some fee-based, some not fee-based, that you should be taking advantage of so that you can, A, keep in touch with all your employees, make sure they understand what's going on. You can give them additional guidance in terms of, okay, at this point, let's all rally at this location. It sends out that mass text, SMS message or email message or even a voice message. Now, some workplaces have sort of reverse hotlines, so if a disaster were to occur, they can call one number. That single point of contact can be pre-recorded, again, giving those individuals that were at the location additional information on what actions they need to be taking now that it's 2 or 3 hours after the event has occurred. Both the mass notification phone hotline, you'd want to be sharing information such as, if approached by the media, what should you do and what should you not do? Who do you refer them to? And the same thing with your social media and website, providing those contacts for other resources to reach out and contact appropriate individuals within your workplace environment. So we have worked through the first few hours. We've contacted all of our staff, our employees, our clients, used a variety of different communications channels to make all that work. So how are we going to manage this response in the hours, days, and weeks ahead? Well, I'm a big believer in using the incident command system. There is an ICS sort of template for private businesses to use in the event of an active shooter, hurricane, or earthquake, or other disasters that may occur. The incident command system, to me, the strengths of it are, yes, you as a business owner, business manager, have the basic concept, but it will allow you to interface with those law enforcement and other emergency response agencies much easier than you would otherwise in terms of just following your normal office management structure. So by assigning someone to be the incident commander, incident manager, that person could be that direct contact with, for example, the police chief, the sheriff, whomever, and understand a little bit more clearly what the roles and responsibilities of emergency responders are, working within that ICS structure, and allowing you to dovetail into it much more rapidly. And the exercises that we present that are workplace driven, we really drive individuals to think through, here's ICS structure, here is the various roles, assign individuals to those roles, identify those responsibilities that public information officer would have. Your office support administrator could be the logistics section chief in terms of knowing what resources are available to the office and what additional resources may be requested from emergency response officials. And as we move forward in today's webinar, you're going to see why it's important to have some structures such as incident command in place to be able to manage the flux of calls that are coming in, to manage potentially donations, volunteers, and all of the activities you're going to be dealing with in the days and the days and weeks ahead. Most important thing, shooting has happened. It's a Friday afternoon. We have notified all the appropriate individuals. Law enforcement is still on site. It's into the early evening. We've set up a management structure. Well, now we need to start moving in the direction of recovery or really managing the consequences. One of the items that is a primary focus that you as the employer or manager is going to need to deal with are assisting families, assisting employees, and by this, what assistance are you going to be able to provide to your staff and their families in the days ahead and potentially weeks ahead. Now, what is really critical at this point, this becomes more than just a employee assistance center, but you as the employer, the manager, need to really engage and provide some leadership to it so that you can help direct assistance to the right people. When I kind of talk about community partners like after the Pulse nightclub shooting, there was a family assistance center opened up. Those community partners came from far and wide. Some of them were the first time they've ever involved themselves in an active shooter or any kind of disaster. Yes, you'll have the traditional Red Cross, Salvation Army, religious organizations, community-based organizations who will want to step up and help. But you need to work with those organizations to ensure that assistance is being provided in a very concise, I want to use controlled method so that assistance provided uniformly across the board and confidentiality is maintained across the board. Yes, you as the office manager, office staff, office employer want to make sure you have a staffing role in running that family assistance center. And during the exercise, and you'll see the URL at the bottom of the page, we actually will provide you a template on how to go about identifying a location. It could be your alternate location in your coop, what kind of staff you as an employer of the workplace may want to engage in helping manage that family assistance center, as well as some list of potential partners, more traditional partners that may need to be a part of that center, and as well as the type of assistance that could or should be provided through that family assistance center. This is an important part here, and as we've played this exercise numerous times, there are no right answers and there are no wrong answers when it comes to death or entry notification. We're into the late Friday evening, early next morning. A number of individuals have lost their life. A number of individuals have been injured, maybe in hospitals, maybe have been released. Most communities across the nation, it's normally law enforcement who is at point for official death notification. But this goes back to that ICS structure I mentioned earlier. By interfacing totally with those emergency response organizations and really driving home the need for you to have an appropriate staff person along with the officer or officers that are making that death notification will help you as the business owner or manager put your best foot forward, show that the company does care about its employees, open up avenues of assistance that could be offered to the employees that just straight law enforcement may not know about. So in putting those individuals together to be part of that death notification team, you need to think now about who are the appropriate individuals, who could fill this role. And some of the folks to look to are, do you have any on your staff, any clergy? Do you lay clergy who may be interested in helping fill this role in this type of an event? And what kind of assistance would the workplace, would your office be able to provide? Many workplaces do have various assistance packages or assistance plans, everything from extended leave right around to additional medical benefits depending on the injuries. Even in some cases where there's loss of life, even some death benefits. So understanding the process, interfacing now with your local law enforcement agency to make sure you're a part of that death notification team is really critical. Now, towards the end of today's webinar, you'll have access, we'll show you access to the JustInTime Training Library. That library has a whole series of videos on how to work within that death notification system that exists. And we'll give you the website for that library in a few minutes, but I strongly recommend after today's webinar, you take an opportunity, go to the death notification component, view some of the videos. It'll help strengthen your understanding of your roles and responsibilities. Continuity of operations. We want to get the business, the workplace back up and operational as rapidly as possible. Most government agencies have one form of a continuity of operations, continuity of government. It's one of those additional plans you want to pull off the shelf. It's probably going to be several days before you can gain access to your building. So making sure you have that COOP plan in a electronic format so you have easy access to it. Part of that continuity of operations piece is what are we as the site manager, the business owner, the government agency who had this occur at our location, what are we going to do as rapidly as possible in coordination with crime scene investigators to begin repairing our building so it doesn't look like there was any kind of active shooter event that occurred. Several years ago in Phoenix, Arizona, there was an active shooter private workplace. The company already had on standby contract a company to come in, clean, replace windows. So really by the next day from the outside of the building, you couldn't tell there was even a shooting that had occurred there. They were very concerned about their image. So in their planning process for consequence management, recovery from an active shooter, they had put a contractor on standby to be able to come in and take care of the building so that the perception was, okay, we're getting back to normal as quickly as we can. So knowing when you can return to your building, typical continuity of operations issues such as what are your non-essential functions over the next couple of days, what can you postpone, what is essential for you to remain operational. In addition, at the end of the webinar today, you'll have access to the JustInTime Training Library. There's a whole section on continuity of operations for workplaces, what you should do, what you can do, and it'll walk you through the planning process. So pulling out that continuity of operations plan at this point is a must. By Saturday morning, if not late Friday night, you need to be seeing where can you resume work, where is your alternate location, talking with law enforcement, when can you return to using the building. Now this is a tricky one. We don't think if we are a private entity about volunteers and donations. How is that managed? What's going to happen? Is it something we as a company or a workplace need to be concerned about? And I can across the board say yes, 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 and even more yes. Challenges will crop up really quick from the standpoint of individuals calling, coming to assist you as individuals, employees, you as a workplace owner. Those volunteers can be from organizations, so again, like the Red Cross or Salvation Army, or from a church or a community spiritual association who wants to provide spiritual care to your employees and their families, to any of the victims that were injured, or the families of those individuals who lost their lives. So thinking through the processes of dealing with volunteers who traditionally show up, as well as how you will work with those more traditional volunteer organizations, is an important part of that recovery process. A couple of recommendations I normally provide is looking at volunteer management. Reach out today if you have a local volunteer center, usually in a United Way. Have a brief discussion with them. Ask them what kind of services they can provide in terms of coordinating volunteers who may want to help at your workplace. Most of those organizations, like United Way, Local Volunteer Center, are already engaged in emergency response and emergency recovery activities in terms of coordinating volunteers. So instead of telling someone, please go away, we don't need your assistance, to be able to say, please call United Way. They're handling all the spontaneous volunteers. They're coordinating anyone who wants to help. And what United Way would usually take and do is turn around and match up those individuals who are wanting to volunteer with more established response volunteer agencies, such as the Red Cross. Donations management, that can be a real big nightmare. Let's take what happened in Sandy Hook several years ago. We all know the shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School. I happen to be in Sandy Hook, not Sandy Hook, Newtown, the town in which Sandy Hook is located in, about a year and a half ago, and sat down and listened to sort of the horror stories they had dealing with donations. They wound up with over 80,000 teddy bears within a matter of a couple of weeks. Took them 2.5 years to dispose of those teddy bears. They wound up with lots and lots of cash donations, and probably spent some of those cash donations incorrectly because they didn't have a well thought out long-term donations management plan. So from the standpoint of a workplace or a business owner, business manager, thinking through donations, once again, like I mentioned earlier with United Way, potentially partnering with United Way, another established charitable fund within the community, letting them take some of the responsibilities of that donation management piece off of your workplace is a strong recommendation, because if you start taking the funds, if you're a university or a government agency or a private workplace, the struggles you're going to be dealing with in terms of donation management, a separate accounting, how's the money being used. One of the questions I had with Newtown, Connecticut was they choose to use some of the money to build a new EMS station, really nice EMS station. And I asked, was that an appropriate use of the money? At the time, they thought it was. They didn't receive a little bit of backlash from using those donated dollars to build a new EMS station for the town. So again, partnering with another organization, or if you're like a university and the event happens there, making sure that your foundation side is on top of the donations piece. And at times it's important to say, okay, please stop sending stuff. We don't need any teddy bears. This goes back to that public information piece, the need for you to be totally engaged throughout the response and recovery with media, traditional media, social media, and to say no is okay when it comes to money. Please don't send any more money. So having some plans in place and some potential partners in place to help with those donations and those volunteers, I think is very essential. Memorial services in themselves. There will always be spontaneous memorial services, but it's just like with death notification. This is an important piece of the entire community healing, community, workplace, everyone coming together to show their support for those individuals who were injured, lost their life during that particular response. Now, what is a workplace's role in helping to coordinate a memorial service? Well, to me, it's a very important role. You want to provide some leadership, you want to provide some staff to potentially be a part of it so that individuals, organizations putting the memorial service together can better understand your processes, your thoughts, your concepts around providing additional assistance to individuals. At the same time, can provide additional information on the upcoming roles and responsibilities of the workplace when we're going to get back on board. You can potentially provide logistics if it's a large campus where the active shooting occurred, provide a location for that memorial service. Coordinating with the community early on is extremely important to prevent the spontaneous memorial services that will be popping up after an active shooter event. So reaching out once again to those community partners, United Way, Chambers of Commerce, potentially Red Cross, and saying, okay, let's all come together, let's do it as one unified group, back to that incident command structure, and provide some leadership, provide some information, provide coordination across the board. Temporary memorials are going to crop up within hours or days after an event. Thinking through what are you going to do both short-term and long-term if a memorial is created in front of your workplace. How are you going to maintain it? What are you going to do in 2 weeks with all the mementos that may be left there? So this whole memorial service coordination is extremely important component of like day 2, day 3, and continuing down the road of recovery. Future risks. The event has occurred. We really worked hard for the last 3 or 4 days. Things are beginning to slow down. Our 24-hour news cycle is off to another incident, another event somewhere in the States or around the world. There's not the same focus back on our particular shooting incident. But you have to start thinking of what are the long-term liabilities. And going back a little bit to the continuity of operations plan, but having some thought as to what do we need to do into the future when we laid off those individuals, one of which returned to shoot up the building. Do we need to reassess our procedures for laying someone off to ensure that they're properly supported in the hours and days following termination? So looking at some of those liabilities in terms of going into the future. As I've mentioned several times, the entire corporate image, whether you're a for-profit, whether you are a government agency, whether you're a library, whoever you are, the image of safety and security is extremely important when it comes back to how you move into the future. People want to still be able to do business with you. Individuals still want to be able to go to the library and check out books. Individuals still want to go to the courthouse, to pay their taxes or whatever. So early on, making sure you're part of that incident command, you're part of that information sharing process is critical, so that in the weeks to come, everyone understands, yes, this happened. We were on top of it as a business or as a workplace, and we're heading down the right track to make sure this never happens again at our location. And so we maintain a good corporate image. So what we just did in the last 30 minutes or so is walk through a couple of high points in the Ardent Century exercise. There are many more aspects of that exercise, individual offices, individual businesses play through as they're working through the exercise. I also mentioned a couple of assets in terms of videos that are in the Just-in-Time Training library. I really encourage you to write down JustInTimeTraining.org. It's a library of about 1,900 videos, a variety of different subjects. There are 2 very complete sections dealing with active shooter awareness from military bases, workplaces, government agencies, hospitals, as well as a very extensive selection of informative training videos dealing with active shooter response and recovery. Again, for everything from hospitals to schools. So take the opportunity in the days and weeks ahead to access the library. There's also good information on continuity of operation planning, on managing volunteers, on managing donations, on death notification, as well as managing memorial services. So really would like to encourage you to access the library, use it as appropriate as a great training tool. And we work with the library as kind of a partnership between Safe and Ready and the Disaster Resistant Communities Group. So with that, we're about a half hour into this. Are there any questions, Cassandra?
Feel free to ask any questions at this point. I saw a couple, but we answered them. Are there anything concerning the content? Just feel free to either type in the Q&A or in the chat box on the right. Or you can feel free to comment as well.
Yeah, as I said at the very beginning, most planning, most training for active shooter is dealing with how do we mitigate it from happening? What safety concerns have we beefed up to prevent it from happening? The training and planning that really focuses in on those initial 20 minutes, hour in terms of evacuating the building, you know, the whole run, hide, and fight. And there's been some changes of thought around the run, hide, and fight, depending on the kind of workplace, such as a hospital. They might think about it a little bit different than the traditional run, hide, and fight. What we're really focusing on today is, okay, in the hours, days, and weeks ahead, how are we as workplace managers going to efficiently, effectively ensure our business is going to come back up in the days, hopefully the days ahead? What are the challenges we're going to have to be faced? What are the community, or who are the community partners that we can work with in a longer term recovery, and to make sure that you know, we've really engaged ourselves in the community during that response, during that recovery phase.
Chris, I have a question for you, and maybe you touched on this, but I missed it. Are there certain communication channels or ways of communicating about what's happened that you recommend in like the hours and days after an incident, or some best practices around that?
Well, you know, I'm going to go back to the communications piece that we touched on at the very beginning. Yeah, maintaining the ability, number one, to stay in constant communication with your employees and their families, and the families of those visitors or clients who may be at the location when the shooting occurs. That's paramount. Yeah, is there a system in place? Not that I've really seen. Now, with employees and their families, there are numerous notification systems, as I said, both private stuff you can download, put on your server, as well as those fee-based systems that are out there that you can preload, so with contact information for all your staff. To me, the second most important piece of the entire communications component is remaining in communications with the community. Make sure the broader community knows what you're doing, knows that you are coordinating activities to help those individuals that are in need as they personally heal, so that the community understands you as a workplace manager, business owner, really are engaged in providing assistance. The community knows about it, and that's also a way of sort of preventing some of the spontaneous organizations from just showing up and saying, we're going to do this. If you're telling them the needs are being met, everyone's being taken care of, and that can be via Facebook, other social media, your website, traditional media. Just make sure the community stays engaged throughout the process, like what occurred last summer in Orlando with the Pulse shooting.
We have a question that shows to be anonymous, but the question is, for state agencies who do most of their business via computers, what are the most important resources to have in place? I'm assuming to do consequence management.
Well, like with, as I mentioned, go back to your continuity of operation plan. If you're a state agency and for some reason you cannot regain access to your work site with your traditional computers, to make sure that you can work remotely, whether that's from a hot site, another location, another state office building, or from home, so that you continue to provide whatever assistance you are providing via the internet. So making sure there are not any firewalls out there that would prevent someone from the Department of Transportation going over to the Department of Health and utilizing their computer system to maintain DOT operations. I know a particular state that no other state agency can access their information on the Department of Transportation's website. There's a state in the country that has that. So having that ability and thinking through that process beforehand, I think it's very important so that you can continue your work remotely via the internet. But just remember, there are firewalls, there are security issues, and sometimes working from home via your personal computer, there may be a firewall altogether that would prevent you from accessing your agency's servers. So that's one of those IT issues that you need to bring them into the planning process. I think I answered that question appropriately.
Are there any other questions? Chris, would you like to touch on the next webinar in the series before we convene?
Sure. In mid-July, well, what I touched on today were some of the processes you need to be thinking about in the recovery component. In July, I've reached out to 2 agencies that were heavily engaged in the recovery efforts from the Pulse shooting. Now, these 2 agencies are nonprofit and faith-based that have a very in-depth, very informative input as to what went well during that particular shooting and what were the challenges that those volunteer organizations, community faith-based organizations had, from gaining access to the site, to making sure they were in the loop as to what was going on, to ensuring that all the efforts of all the multi-organizations were coordinated. And most important of all with this particular shooting, since was the interface with the alternate lifestyle group, because it presented some real challenges in the Pulse response. So 2 different organizations really going to go in depth as to what worked, what didn't work, what were their lessons learned.
Thank you for that. I have posted the registration link for that seminar on the right in the chat window. It's also on the safeandready.org site. I thank you for your time. Just to reiterate, we will be sending out the recording for this webinar after in the next few days. And the materials, the presentation be available anywhere, Chris? The slides for anyone to download?
We'll put them on the JustInTime Training Library site.
Okay, great. Any last minute questions? Otherwise, I thank you for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.